So you just talked about adding a visual component to this computer music you were making, but so what caused them to become less abstract and more story based?
Well, kind of like I did with the simple loops, where it was kind of like a side project to kind of relax and have fun with all of this stuff I was learning how to do. That's when I kind of once I got for the first time Adobe After Effects. That program sort of changed my whole world, creative world, because if you've never used Adobe After Effects, it's essentially um, a music sequencer, but for Photoshop. So you can make images move on a timeline, just like you do in a music sequencer, and you have keyframes, and you set points where something has to be somewhere, and the software fills in the blanks. Um, so when I started doing this sort of abstract sort of things, abstract animation and more sort of shapes and forms, and then as sort of a side project, and in order to continue learning how to use the software, I thought it'd be fun to kind of tell little stories and sort of every time I do a new video, one of my sort of personal things is to kind of learn how to do a new technique or a new trick, you might say, or learn a new software or learn a new aspect of the software that I never used before. So that's kind of how it got started. Was just for fun. It was just a hobby, and it still is a hobby, but it was just for fun to play with some of the ideas that I've been working on and some of the more serious work. I don't know why um, I wanted to tell stories. I guess I've always kind of part of me's always kind of wanted to be a film composer, but I've never really been so attracted to that kind of traditional film composing music. But I do like having stories go along with sound. I guess I've always kind of listened to music that way. Even when I was a kid listening to Beethoven symphonies, I would kind of imagine stories and characters that went along with them. Certainly with Mozart, there's a lot of that going on, even obviously in his operas, but in his piano concertos, there's always characters, different themes. You have the principal, the A theme and the B theme, and they're supposed to be different characters, and so I've always been attracted to that idea, and I guess I just wanted to goof around and see what I could come up with in that, using those kind of concepts, relating what's happening in music to relating what's going on in a space or in a place or an imaginary place, and maybe in that imaginary place there's imaginary characters, and what do they do, and how do they move, and how does the music affect the way we look at the character. Those kind of ideas have always been attractive to me. I guess that's kind of what got me started.
Yeah, so then when you sit down to uh, make one of these videos, what sort of comes first, the music or the story, or is that not really even a sensible sort of way to think about it in terms of how you do it?
No, no, that's a great question. In fact, that's what another thing about multimedia composition that what got me so excited about the idea is that you can create these things almost together. Um, Usually, like, for the videos I do now, I usually have some kind of music first, or at least some musical ideas, themes, and maybe chord progressions or just general moods. Um, but I never can really flesh out the music until I get part of the story going and the characters. And I'd like to say it all happens at the same time. And sometimes it does happen all at the same time. And that's what gives me the biggest thrill is when I can get the characters and the story and the music and the scenes and the places and all happening together. That's that sort of kick, that creative kick of doing that is what, kind of got me and kept me in working in this sort of multimedia world. But on the other hand, sometimes you get stuck. Sometimes you don't know what's going to happen next, or sometimes you don't know what music's going to happen next. Um, and so then it becomes kind of neat because if I don't know what the next music is going to be, I can stop working on the music and just do the nuts and bolts of animation. Or if I don't know what's going to happen in the story, I can sit down and start writing more music, and then eventually something will come to me for what is supposed to happen. Um, I guess, there's an idea, 19th century idea that was popularized by Richard Wagner. That's the total artwork, the complete artwork. And Wagner's operas, where he tried to write the libretto and tell the story and write the music and create the scenery and the costumes and all of these sort of elements that make up a production of a theater work. And as a single creative artist, you are responsible for all of these things. And that idea, I'm not a Wagner fan, but that idea of making all of the elements as one singular sort of creative expression is what keeps me going. It's what I love. It's what I love about all of this work that I'm doing.
So focusing now on the story side of things, the stories you tell are very unique, and I find some of them to be simple in some ways, but also very mysterious and interesting. And so I was wondering if you could talk about any influences you have in terms of storytelling and how you come up with your story ideas.
That's a good question, and it's not an easy one to answer with anything in particular. I will start out that answer by saying another thing I got very interested and excited about in grad school was studying about surrealism. And that's when I realized that as a storyteller, surrealism is probably the sort of 20th century artistic sort of movement that I'm most connected with. And also a bit of Dada as well. I've always kind of been into that theater of the absurd idea. Waiting for Godot was a big sort of influence on my own type of storytelling, where nothing really has to happen, but at the same time, because as an audience member, you're kind of projecting your own sort of idea of what's going on. And I don't like to be obvious. I don't like to be explicit. Sometimes you have to be, but I don't like to be. I like to be kind of vague and surreal, and I like to have whoever's watching it. I like to leave a lot of room for interpretation. Let me say it that way. I like to leave a lot of room for interpretation, and I guess I've been pretty successful at that because a lot of people have no idea what I'm doing, or at least what I'm trying to say. And the whole point is, I'm not trying to tell you what this is about. In that sense, I'm very old-fashioned as an artist. I'm not trying to explicitly say that this is about this or this is about that. I like to leave it kind of vague, and there has to be enough there to kind of point your mind in certain directions. But when I first started out, I tried to basically not have any stories at all. I tried to, day in the life kind of reality TV kind of thing, where, this is just what's happening and it doesn't necessarily make sense. And in my mind, it doesn't have to make sense. I can make sense out of it. And following up on that idea of where, I don't want to be explicit, I also like the idea where if you watch something of mine one day, you might have a different idea than you had when you watched it the previous day. That's kind of that comes from my musical background because music is so much like that. So I try to keep my stories to feel and be more like music rather than like stories. This, to me, the stories are and the music are extensions of the same kind of thing. I'm not really a storyteller. I'm not a writer. I never took creative writing classes. I just sort of like to have these abstract kind of things happening and leave it to your imagination.
All right, well, we're going to take a quick break to listen to a track from The Adventures of Ratboy Genius, and then we'll be right back. This is WOBC Oberlin, 91.5 FM, Oberlin College and Community Radio. You were just listening to the music from Chapter 1 of The Adventures of Ratboy Genius, and now we return to our interview with Ryan Dorin. Moving back to the more technical side of things, the voices in your videos are really great and unique. How do you create them?
I have to say that is the question I get almost every day on YouTube. Someone's like, "How do you do the voices? How do you do the voices?" That is at every. Oh my God, it's not much of a secret. Well, there's a little bit of a secret. I'm not going to give the whole thing away and tell you how I do mine, but I'll tell you the process. I just start with a text to speech, and the magic really happens in post when you're retuning the voices and kind of moving the pitches around to do the melody. In order to get the rhythms right, I have to do a lot of editing. I have to record the text to speech at different speeds, and sometimes you want it faster, sometimes you want it slower, and I have to chop it up and get the stuff to fit. It doesn't just come out sounding like that. It comes out sounding like garbage. But afterwards, when I've retuned it and got the rhythms right and got it to fit with the music, is when it starts to have character. Now, some of the voices are me. A lot of the voices are me. Happy Man, Green Monster, Summer Solstice Baby, Clyde. Those are all me, just pitch shifted in different ways. Not just literally pitch shifted, but with certain software, you can control not just the fundamental pitch, but also the pitch of the overtones, the harmonics, and the timbre. Basically, that's what And when I first started learning this stuff, I discovered how you could make a man sound like a woman or a woman sound like a man. I'm like, wow, that is just unbelievable. And just a click of a couple buttons, I can make myself sound like a little girl, or make this girl sing like a boy. And so that's kind of how that goes. But, like I say, I don't use auto-tune, but there's other software that have similar types of systems and algorithms like auto-tune. But that's kind of how it's done. And in order to make a character, to make it sound like a character, you have to really get in there with the pitch and really reshape the inflections of the voice. Sometimes I deliberately don't reshape the inflections of the voice, and sometimes I do. It depends how expressive I'm trying to be. But some of the voices, like Sneezy in the new Little King John series, that's just from the Mac operating system. It's just he started out as I think Daniel was the name of the voice, and then for the last episode when he had a lot of singing to do, Daniel wasn't working, and I changed him to oh God, I don't remember what his name is. Another British male voice. But that's basically it. It's there's I don't know if you have any follow-up questions on that.
No, I mean that's really definitely makes me feel a lot better because when I first started watching your videos, listening to your music, I thought, oh, this is a text to speech that has been messed with. And then later, as I listened to more, I started to second guess myself, and I was like, wait, is this actually a voice that's been pitch shifted? And so it's kind of nice to hear that that they were both
Yeah,
right.
they're both right. Well, I started doing my own voice when I was started doing the Happy Man opera because there was no way I could pull all that opera off with just text to speech. I mean, technically yes, but it would have just been way too much trouble to do. It would have added, 20 times the amount of work rather than me just sitting here. But I don't really sing. I mean, I'm not a good singer. I'm not a trained singer, but I do, kind of speak the rhythm, speak the words in the right rhythm, and then pitch shift it afterwards. Um, yeah, that's basically what's happening. And eventually, I've been toying with the idea of getting more voices, different people's voices in these stories, and I'll probably get to that eventually. But for now, it's just me and certain text to speech voices. Like Ratboy Genius and Little King John, that's the same voice, just pitched differently.
Another aspect of your videos that has changed a lot over time is the visual aspect, particularly the shift from 2D to 3D animation. What drove you to make that change?
Um, I guess, like I said before, I just like to always try to teach myself new software or new techniques. When I first heard about this was years ago, when I first heard about Blender, which is many of you probably have heard of it as open source animation and modeling and animation software. I got really intrigued because it was free, and I'm a big fan of open source in general. Just the whole idea of a community of people developing tools for people to use is just, I think that's definitely the wave of the future, at least in the creative world. And so I spent a summer teaching myself Blender. And my goal for the end of the summer was to try to have a 3D model of the Ratboy Genius because I figured the 2D stuff was fun, but it you can't do that. You can't just keep doing that forever. You have to kind of grow, and so I kind of use that as the stories, where the Ratboy Genius creates himself in 3D, and that was literally almost a full-time job for one summer. Of course, back then there weren't as many helpful tutorials on how to do this stuff, and also the software used to be a lot buggier than it is now. So sometimes you wouldn't know if you were doing something wrong or if the software was doing something wrong. So it was a very, very trying effort to learn how to do this. I never took any classes. I figured I could just teach myself, and I did. And that was kind of exciting. It turned me into more of a puppet master. That's still the way I think of it. I think of them like puppets. Um, and, it's kind of nice to have the 2D drawings, but of course, I'm not an artist, so I couldn't make actual animation in 2D, not that I'd want to share with anyone. So the only way to get the characters to move around, and also I wanted to get a little bit more into a virtual reality kind of vibe where the character could exist in a real place. Um, that always excited me. And so the only way to do that was to learn 3D. So I just taught myself, and I'm still teaching myself. I'm not an expert by any means, and anyone who's seen my videos can see immediately that I am not a professional animator. But I've learned enough to get the job done for my work. Could always be room for improvement, and I like to think I'm getting better at it. Um, but that's kind of how it started. Of course, with the Happy Man opera, that was all 2D, and what really excited me about that was that the characters are just drawings that bounce up and down. But when you're watching it, I'd like to think that because of the way the music works, the characters' expressions and emotions are changing. And even though Happy Man never stops smiling, um, I tried to make it seem like he was sad sometimes. And I'd like to think that the music can kind of do that just all by itself. And so you look at this picture and the picture never changes. But because of the music that you hear, your interpretation of that picture changes. And that's another idea that really excited me.